Welcome to CSS Breakdown, book by book, season 06, episode 29. Today we're diving into Norman Lowe's Mastering Modern British History, the fourth edition, focusing on, well, a truly transformative time, the Attlee Labour governments from 1945 to 1951.
Absolutely. And our goal here is really to pull out the key insights, the crucial nuggets from Lowe's text about this pivotal post-war period in Britain.
We want to give you a sharp, clear understanding of what happened and why it mattered so much.
And it absolutely mattered. You've got Britain, victorious after World War II, but frankly, utterly exhausted. The challenges were just immense.
Right, a shattered economy, unimaginable national debt, and then suddenly that crucial American wartime aid, Lend-Lease, just stops.
Exactly. And against that backdrop, something pretty astonishing happens. A Labour government sweeps into power with this, well, incredibly ambitious agenda.
So that's what we're unpacking today, how they tackled those massive challenges and what kind of lasting impact their policies actually had.
Let's start with that election, the Labour victory in '45, because it really was a surprise mandate for change.
It was. Germany defeated in May 45, and Labour were, well, they're itching to leave the wartime coalition. They wanted an election.
Understandably, the parliament they had was 10 years old.
Imagine, Churchill, the war hero, he actually wanted to fight the election as leader of a national government, like Lloyd George did back in 1918.
But Labour said no. They stood firm.
So voting day was July 5th, but the results, they were held back for 3 whole weeks.
Yeah, to allow all the armed forces spread across the globe time to get their votes counted.
And when those results finally landed, it was a shockwave.
A genuine shockwave. Labour won this massive victory, 393 seats to the Conservatives' 213. The Liberals were practically wiped out, only 12 seats.
It was Labour's first ever overall majority. This wasn't just a small win, it was a clear mandate, wasn't it?
Absolutely. A mandate to pursue their core objectives, build that welfare state, nationalize key industries, aim for full employment, and create an open foreign policy based on cooperation.
It's fascinating, especially considering the context. Voter turnout was high, over 72%. But there was just general amazement because everyone assumed Churchill, the man who led them through the war, would walk it.
But here's the crucial insight Lowe brings out. While Churchill the man was incredibly popular, the Conservative Party was not.
Right. People hadn't forgotten the 1930s.
Not at all. They remembered the Depression, the unemployment, and they largely blamed the Conservatives. As Harold Macmillan famously said, it was not Churchill who lost the 1945 election. It was the ghost of Neville Chamberlain.
That's such a powerful line. And the Conservatives didn't really help themselves, did they? Showing little enthusiasm for the Beveridge Report.
No, they didn't. Their own white papers on social policy just didn't get much publicity. Labour, on the other hand, absolutely hammered home their promise to implement Beveridge.
They offered what people desperately wanted: jobs, new houses, and, critically, a national health service.
Exactly what people wanted to hear. There were even some controversies, weren't there? Conservative complaints about a supposed left-wing bias.
Yeah, and the Army Education Corps and the Army Bureau of Current Affairs supposedly influencing the troops, though the historian Henry Pelling thought that was probably exaggerated.
What probably wasn't exaggerated in its negative impact was Churchill's own radio broadcast.
Oh, the Gestapo comment.
Yes, equating a Labour government with the kind of features that were associated with the Gestapo. It was widely seen as, well, excessive, especially given he'd worked so closely and successfully with Attlee, Morrison, Bevan during the war.
It backfired. And it highlighted something else. These Labour leaders weren't untested unknowns.
Precisely. They'd gained valuable ministerial experience in the coalition. They'd shown they were moderate, competent. That built confidence.
So who were these new men in power? Let's start with the Prime Minister, Clement Attlee.
Attlee, middle-class background, Oxford-educated, initially a barrister, but then he becomes a social worker in London's East End.
Driven by social conscience, MP from 1922, Labour leader from 35. But his appearance, quite deceptive.
Very much so. Mild, quiet, unassuming, easily underestimated. Churchill's famous quips come to mind.
A sheep in sheep's clothing. And later, a modest little man with plenty to be modest about. Ouch.
But the reality, as Lowe points out, was very different. Attlee was shrewd, determined, an excellent chairman of the cabinet.
Peter Hennessy's description is brilliant. Using silence as a weapon, cutting off wafflers, absolutely brutal with the inadequate.
Far more effective than any prime minister since. He really knew how to manage his team.
Then you have Ernest Bevin as Foreign Secretary. What a backstory.
Incredible. Son of a farm laborer working from age 11 becomes a drayman, then this hugely powerful leader of the Transport and General Workers Union.
Turned against industrial action after the general strike in 26. And he was outstanding as Minister of Labor during the war, wasn't he?
Absolute crucial figure. And there were others too. Hugh Dalton as Chancellor, though he was later replaced by Sir Stafford Cripps.
We'll definitely talk more about Cripps later. Herbert Morrison as Leader of the House. And of course, Aneurin Bevan, Minister of Health.
Bevan, the driving force behind the NHS. What's striking is that most of this top team, apart from Bevan really, had served in that wartime coalition.
So they weren't just idealists. They were an experienced, capable team ready to govern.
Exactly. Ready for the huge task ahead.
Okay, so they have the mandate, they have the team. Let's talk about the welfare state. This is probably the defining legacy, isn't it?
It really is. When we talk about a welfare state, we mean a government aiming to provide the best possible social services for everyone. And the Attlee governments are largely credited with setting up Britain's system.
The Beveridge Report looms large here, published back in November 1942.
It did. It provided the ideas, the framework for tackling those 5 giants: want, disease, ignorance, squalor, and idleness.
But Lowe adds an important nuance, doesn't he? That maybe it wasn't quite as revolutionary as it seemed at the time.
That's right. Historians now recognize that many proposals were actually extensions of existing schemes. They weren't always generous and, interestingly, often discriminated against working women.
Which is fascinating, because labor actually had its own plans brewing before Beveridge. Their 1942 conference committed them to Social Security, family allowances, and an NHS.
So they had their own vision. And Attlee, despite the terrible economic situation, was absolutely determined. He pushed ahead.
A mass of new legislation passed incredibly quickly, mostly by July 1948.
And Lowe concludes they really did tame want, disease, and idleness, even if squalor and ignorance still needed more work.
It sparks that debate, doesn't it? Was it a peaceful revolution or more evolutionary? Derek Fraser's point, the British welfare state was not born, it had evolved.
It's a key historical discussion. But whatever you call it, the National Health Service stands out.
The jewel in the crown, perhaps, architected by Aneurin Bevan.
Bevan, former Welsh miner, often underestimated apparently, but a formidable personality. Self-educated, brilliant speaker, one of the few who could really take on Churchill in debate.
And Lowe says he mastered the complex details of the health system incredibly quickly. He knew what he wanted.
Absolutely. Universal, free medical care. GPs, specialists, hospitals, dentists, opticians, the works, spectacles, false teeth, medicines, midwifery, everything. Free at the point of use.
And he had the courage to see it through, despite huge opposition. It launched July 5th, 1948, funded mainly by taxation.
Yes, with some national insurance contributions mixed in. And Bevan insisted on nationalizing the hospitals.
Why was that so important to him?
To ensure uniform standards across the country. Avoid postcode lotteries. So England and Wales were divided into regional boards. Scotland, too, all appointed by him, controlling policy. Local committees handled the day-to-day.
But the opposition, especially from doctors, was fierce, wasn't it?
Oh, considerable. Family doctors really disliked the idea of becoming salaried state employees, civil servants, they called it. They feared losing independence, interference in the doctor-patient relationship.
The British Medical Association, the BMA, threatened a boycott.
They did. In February 48, something like 90% of BMA members were threatening not to join. It looked like it might collapse before it even started.
But Bevan was clever.
Very clever. His solution was ingenious. Doctors wouldn't get salaries. Instead, they'd receive fees based on the number of patients on their list, a capitation fee.
And that made all the difference.
It seemed to. Suddenly, the opposition crumbled. When the NHS launched, around 90% of GPs signed up.
Amazing. But the costs, they spiraled, didn't they?
Much more expensive than anyone predicted. Over $400 million in the first year. Prescriptions nearly tripled by 1951. The demand for spectacles and false teeth was astronomical, double what was expected in the first year alone.
Which led to charges.
Yes, in 1951, charges were introduced for adults half the cost of false teeth and spectacles to try and curb the spending.
And this is where Bevan draws the line.
He did. He resigned in protest, furious that the core principle of a free health service had been breached. A really principled stand, though he's still rightly remembered as the architect.
Despite the costs and that controversy, the impact was immediate and profound, wasn't it?
Remarkably smooth operation, actually, and a striking improvement in working-class health. Deaths from TB, pneumonia, diphtheria dropped significantly.
Andrew Marr's quote is perfect. Poor people arriving not as beggars, but as citizens with a sense of right.
Exactly. And Sake and Cook call it an almost revolutionary social innovation, the thing the British would become most proud of.
Beyond the NHS, there were other key pillars of the welfare state. The National Insurance Act of 1946.
Right, building on the 1911 Act, but extending it to cover all adults. Compulsory weekly contributions worker, employer, state for sickness, unemployment, pensions, widow's benefits, maternity allowances, even death grants.
And the pensions were actually more generous than Beveridge proposed.
They were, yes. Then you had the National Assistance Act in '48. This was crucial for filling the gaps.
For people not yet covered by the main insurance scheme.
Exactly. Or those with specific needs, unmarried mothers, the blind, deaf, disabled, existing non-contributory pensioners. It set up national assistance boards.
And Lowe highlights this as a real break from the past.
It was. Because the money came from central government taxation, not local rates, like the old poor law system, even though there was still a means test. It aimed to remove the stigma. It also allowed local authorities to provide homes for the elderly and handicapped. Generally welcomed, even the conservatives didn't vote against it.
And industrial injuries.
The National Insurance Industrial Injuries Act, 1946. A massive improvement on the old Workmen's Compensation Acts, which often made it really hard for workers to prove injury and get fair compensation. This made contributions compulsory and simplified the process for state-funded benefits and pensions for injured or disabled workers.
Okay, let's touch on education. The main focus was implementing the Butler Act from 1944.
That's right, free secondary education for all up to 15. School meals, milk, medical services provided too, and the introduction of the 11+ exam.
The exam that decided whether you went to a grammar school, a secondary technical, or a secondary modern.
Precisely. And in one way, it was a huge success. Lowe says it allowed a whole new generation of talented working-class children to get ahead, many reaching university. Unthinkable before the war for most. Plus, a successful youth employment service, expansion of universities and technical colleges.
But criticisms emerged pretty quickly.
Two main ones. First, provision was really unequal across the country. Some areas had loads of grammar school places, others very few. So the 11+ wasn't selecting based on pure ability, but on available places in that area.
A postcode lottery again.
Essentially, yes. And second, it created this divisive system. Secondary moderns rapidly became seen as second best for the 11+ failures, a new kind of class distinction.
Experts were already arguing for comprehensive schools then.
They were. Taking all children at 11, no selection. Many felt Labour really missed an opportunity there to create a truly class-free system.
And the Korean War impacted education spending too.
It did. Heavy defense spending meant cuts elsewhere. Fewer new schools, nurseries, colleges built than originally planned.
Housing remained a massive headache, didn't it?
An incredibly persistent problem. 700,000 houses destroyed in the war. On top is an existing pre-war shortage. Churchill's government estimated 750,000 were needed.
And this fell under Bevan's Ministry of Health as well. He was busy.
Extremely busy. Despite the NHS focus, he spearheaded the housing drive. But the challenges were huge. Raw materials were scarce, expensive.
Yet they did build a lot of houses.
They did. Lowe gives the figures. 55,046, up to 140,047, over 284,048 that included the prefabs.
Which Bevan privately called rabbit hutches.
Apparently so. But they averaged over 200,000 new houses a year, up to 51, mostly council houses. And Bevan insisted on higher standard 3 bedrooms, indoor bathroom, and toilet. Quality mattered to him.
But even that wasn't enough.
Unfortunately not. Churchill's estimate was too low. Plus, there was an unforeseen post-war spike in marriages and the birth rate. So by 1951, there was still a serious housing shortage, estimated at 750,000 fewer houses than households.
Bevan also brought in rent controls for private tenants, though.
Yes, a crucial protection for many people at the time.
Labour also looked at improving the environment and tackling some older political issues.
They did. They repealed Baldwin's 1927 Trade Disputes Act, making the political levy for unions legal again, though members could contract out. And environmentally, the New Towns Act of 1946 was significant.
Giving the government power to build planned, healthy towns.
Exactly. Tailored to residents' needs. Unlike the chaotic sprawl of the 19th century, by 51, you had 14 new towns underway, like Stevenage and East Kilbride.
And the Town and Country Planning Act, another Bevan measure.
Yes, 1947. This gave county authorities responsibility for 20-year development plans. wider compulsory purchase powers, control over advertising hoardings, protecting historic buildings, and the government could levy a development charge on increased land values. Quite forward-thinking.
Okay, so we've covered the massive social changes. Now let's shift to the economy. Labor's vision for a planned economy.
Right. The immediate post-war need was stark. Restore trade, rebuild prosperity. Britain had lost two-thirds of its export trade, and they owed a fortune over $3,000 million, much of it to the U.S. for wartime credit. A huge balance of payments deficit.
And Labor's core belief was that nationalization was the answer.
They believed it was the best way to restructure, modernize industry, giving the state control over the means of production, distribution, and exchange. The idea was more efficient planning, better cooperation between industries, fair treatment for workers.
Coal mining being the classic example they pointed to.
Absolutely. Seen as inefficient, terrible labor relations, crying out for government control. And the big overarching goal was always full employment, avoiding the mass unemployment of the interwar years.
Herbert Morrison largely oversaw the nationalization program.
He did. The principle was state ownership of key industries, with profits theoretically going to the Treasury to help pay for the welfare state.
First, the Bank of England in 46.
To control financial levers. Then air transport, reorganized into BOAC, BEA, and BSAA.
Coal mining in 47. That must have been symbolic.
Hugely symbolic. Around 1,500 collieries taken over by the National Coal Board. Great rejoicing among the miners, as Lowe puts it, though conservatives criticized it as too monolithic, too centralized.
Cable and wireless followed, then public transport in 48.
Yes, under the British Transport Commission, docks, railways, London transport, road haulage, passenger transport, aiming for a coordinated national network. Electricity followed in 48, taking over hundreds of companies to standardize services under area boards. The national grid itself had actually been state-owned since 1926.
And finally, the gas industry in 49.
Bringing hundreds of small firms into a national system. But the big fight, the really controversial one, was iron and steel.
Why was that so different?
Because, unlike coal, the iron and steel industry was actually pretty prosperous and efficient. Labor still insisted it was a commanding height of the economy that needed state control, though even Morrison apparently had some doubts.
But the conservatives dug their heels in.
Completely. Their view was nationalization might be justified for failing industries, but not profitable ones. The parliamentary opposition was bitter.
And it led to a constitutional showdown with the House of Lords.
It did. The Lords refused to pass the bill. So Labor had to pass the Parliament Act in 1949, reducing the Lords' delaying power from 2 years down to 1 year.
They also abolished plural voting and university seats at the same time.
Yes, tidying up some archaic electoral practices. But because of all the delays, iron and steel nationalization only actually happened after the 1950 election.
And the conservatives promptly reversed it when they got back in power in 53.
They did. It remained a political football.
We mentioned the dire economic situation. American aid was crucial, wasn't it?
Absolutely vital. Lend-Lease ended abruptly in August 45, leaving Britain needing cash, fast. J.M. Keynes negotiated a big loan from the U.S. in 46, $3.75 billion.
Less than hoped for, though, and with tough conditions.
Yes, 2% interest, repayments from 51, and crucially, making sterling convertible in 1947, which proved difficult. Despite recovering industry and exports, the loan was used up within a year. The balance of payments deficit was still huge.
But then came the Marshall Plan.
Lifeline number 2. George Marshall, the U.S. Secretary of State, launched the European Recovery Program in 1948, partly altruistic, partly self-interest, boosting U.S. exports, countering communism.
And Britain was a major recipient.
Huge, $12,263 million in Marshall aid. Lowe says this enabled the recovery to be completed. By 1950, British exports were 75% above their 1938 levels. A remarkable turnaround, really.
Alongside this aid, Labour maintained very tight control over the economy, didn't they? Especially under Sir Stafford Cripps.
Yes, Cripps became Chancellor in 1947, an interesting figure. Aristocratic background, barrister, but a devout socialist convert. Very moralistic, austere public image. Believed austerity was the path to economic salvation.
Though his biographer, Peter Clark, revealed a more complex private persona, apparently smoked, gambled, had a good sense of humor.
Indeed. But publicly, he was the epitome of austerity. His priorities were stark. First are exports, second is capital investment in industry, and last are the needs, comforts, and amenities of the family.
He told people to submerge all thought of personal gain. The Observer's comment about homemade lemonade boiling in his veins is priceless.
It captures that sense of fervent, almost puritanical zeal. And the controls were stringent.
Rationing continued long after the war.
It did. Bread was rationed from 46 to 48, potatoes in late 47. Meat, bacon, butter, tea, sugar, still rationed right up to 1951. And often the allowances were lower than during the war itself.
Tough times. But they did subsidize food prices.
Heavily. And helped farmers massively. Price guarantees, modernization subsidies. Agricultural output rose 20% between 47 and 52. Farming became highly mechanized.
But there was also the fuel crisis in the winter of 46-47.
A really grim period. Severe coal and electricity rationing due to overwhelming demand. It was actually illegal to use domestic electricity during certain hours. Factories shut. 2 million people temporarily unemployed. A real shock to the system.
Controls extended to building as well.
Absolutely. Materials rationed. Licenses needed. Priority went to factories, schools, council houses. Forget building dance halls or pubs.
Financial controls too. Rents, profits, interest rates.
All controlled. Tight limits on foreign currency. No holidays abroad for most people. Import controls were key to managing the balance of payments.
So the government bought raw materials and directed them to export industries.
Precisely. Cars, tractors, ships, engineering, aircraft, chemicals got priority, which meant domestically a chronic shortage of consumer goods. You couldn't just go out and buy things.
And Cripps even persuaded the unions to accept wage restraint.
A remarkable achievement, really, between 48 and 50, given that prices were rising. Shows his influence.
Finally, the devaluation of the pound in 49.
Yes, August 49. Triggered by a U.S. recession draining Britain's gold reserves. The pound dropped sharply against the dollar, from $4.03 down to $2.80. Controversial, seen by some as an overreaction, but by others as a necessary dose of reality.
Made imports pricier, but exports cheaper.
Which gave exports a needed boost, at least for a while.
Right. So after all that frantic activity, the welfare state, nationalization, austerity, how do historians assess labor's success? Lowe outlines quite divergent views.
Very much so. Broadly, three main camps. First, the sympathetic view.
This includes historians like Kenneth Morgan, Paul Addison, Peter Hennessy.
Right. They argue labor was largely successful in implementing its 1945 mandate. Social policies were innovative, highly successful, setting the pattern for 25 years, really, until Thatcher.
And economically?
They argue planning surpassed previous efforts, brought considerable success. By 1950, recovery was well underway. Inflation controlled, full employment, rising exports, healthier balance of payments. Morgan called 1948-50 amongst the most thriving periods economically.
They like the mixed economy idea, a middle way.
Yes, between capitalism and communism. And they point to foreign policy wins too. Marshall Plan, NATO, Indian independence. Karen Cross summed it up. Given the awesome problems of 45, achievements could hardly have been greater.
They acknowledge the setback around 1951 due to Korea and rearmament.
Yes, the inflation, shortages, the NHS charges, Rowe that split the party and saw Cripps replaced by Gateskill. But Hennessy's overall verdict is still incredibly positive. The most hyper-achieving peacetime government this century, in economic and especially social terms. Essentially, they delivered on their promises.
Okay, so that's view number one. Then there's the unsympathetic left-wing view.
Represented by historians like John Saville. Their take, labor was a great disappointment to true socialists. They didn't bring in genuine socialism. They actually ended up strengthening capitalism.
How so? What were their criticisms?
They point to failures in economic planning,
Yeah.
argue the leaders weren't expert planners, didn't listen to advice. Even sympathetic historians like Morgan admit planning was distinctly weak at the center. It was reactive, piecemeal, not a grand strategy. No real targets set for investment or production.
And nationalization gets criticized from this perspective too.
Heavily. Set up as public corporations, similar to conservative models from the 20s, run by expert boards, no worker involvement in decisions or profits. Too bureaucratic, workers felt excluded.
Plus the compensation paid to former owners.
Seen as excessive, 164 meters for coal, 240 meters for steel, draining potential profits for years. They bought out the owners, but often kept the same inefficient management.
And they only nationalized about 20% of industry.
Yes, and mostly the unprofitable bits needing investment. Profitable sectors stayed private. The government didn't invest enough in the nationalized industries either, leading to inefficiency and deficits. The dream of profits funding the welfare state didn't materialize.
So the public saw nationalization as inefficient.
Largely, yes. Labor failed to sell the benefits or explain the underlying problems and compensation costs. Miss a chance, maybe, to nationalize profitable consumer industries to show state ownership could work differently.
This view sees the leadership as too cautious.
Yes, Cautious men who'd gone as far as they dared. No plans for more nationalization after steel. It was the climax of old reforms, not the start of a new collectivist era. Consolidation, not revolution.
And criticism of foreign policy, too, trying to be a great power on a weak economy.
Exactly. Developing the atomic bomb in 47, getting involved in Korea seen as clinging to a great power illusion Britain couldn't afford.
Okay, that's the left critique. Then the unsympathetic right-wing view, famously from Corelli Barnett.
Barnett, the audit of war, the lost victory. He agrees Labor delivered its manifesto, but argues the effects were disastrous.
His core argument is about the welfare state.
Absolutely central. He argues the government was seduced by utopian beverage schemes the economy couldn't sustain. Labor's obsession with the welfare state, he says, soaked up resources that should have gone into modernizing industry.
Leaving Britain burdened and uncompetitive.
That's his claim. Saddled with a long-term burden that hampered the economy for decades. Social reform was needed, yes, but after industry was efficient and profitable enough to pay for it, he puts heavy responsibility for post-war decline on Beveridge and Attlee.
A very provocative thesis. But more recent historians have pushed back against Barnett.
Strongly. The consensus seems to be swinging back towards a more sympathetic view again. Historians like Pugh, Pierce, Terrazzo, Tomlinson argue Barnett overstated his case. Britain's decline involved far more forces at work.
Pierce points out other countries also increased welfare spending.
Right. This was also the case among Britain's economic rivals and so cannot constitute a distinguishing feature explaining poor economic performance. It wasn't unique to Britain.
And Martin Pugh defends the spending record.
Yes, argues expenditure didn't spiral out of control, chancellors were extremely careful, and he makes the crucial counterpoint. What was the economic cost of untreated ill health before 1945? A fit workforce is an economic asset. A genuine audit needs to consider that gain.
David Kynaston praises the achievement of full employment.
A huge achievement in itself. And Terrazzo and Tomlinson directly counter Barnett's claim that labor ignored industry. They argue important steps were taken.
Such as?
Prioritizing factory building over social infrastructure, setting up working parties to investigate key industries, establishing the British Institute of Management, sending teams to the U.S. to learn techniques, campaigning for joint production committees in factories.
So why wasn't it more successful? They point to employer resistance.
Partly, yes. George L. Bernstein's view is that British industry was often resistant to any change, suspicious of labor, resented advice, and saw consulting unions as weakness. So labor faced uphill battles trying to modernize industry from the outside.
Fascinating debate with lots of angles. So if labor achieved so much, according to these later historians, why did they lose the 1951 election?
Several factors converged. First, sheer public exhaustion with austerity.
People had just had enough.
Rationing, housing shortages. It felt like it had gone on too long. Then the Korean War brought new restrictions, rising cost of living, and the increase in compulsory military service to 2 years in 1950 was deeply unpopular.
Second, perceived weakness in foreign policy.
The Iran crisis over the Abadan oil refinery, the government didn't send troops as conservatives urged, leaving them open to the charge of weakness. That, plus Korea, helped the opposition cry. Churchill is the man to lead.
Third, the conservatives had an appealing offer.
Very appealing. Promised to build 300,000 houses a year, more red meat. Incredibly tempting. And the general theme of set people free from socialist controls resonated.
Particularly with the middle class.
Yes. While the working class largely stuck with labor, the middle class drift away, especially in the Southeast, continued. Resentment over high taxes for welfare, feeling their incomes were falling behind rising working class wages.
Fourth, labor itself seemed tired and divided.
They campaigned on their record, but the Bevanite split over NHS charges hurt them. There was just a general air of exhaustion after 6 incredibly intense years.
And finally, the way the Liberal vote swung.
Crucial in a close election. Only 109 Liberal candidates stood. In seats without one, Liberal voters tended to back the Conservatives.
Which leads to that statistical anomaly.
Exactly. Labor actually got more votes than ever before, 13.95 million. More votes even than the Conservatives, who got 13.7 million.
That won fewer seats.
Fewer seats. 295 for Labor, 311 for the Conservatives and their allies. The reason? Labor piled up huge wasted majorities in safe seats, while Conservative wins were often narrower, more efficiently distributed, And a collapse of the Liberal vote share just tilted the balance in enough marginals.
So a narrow defeat in terms of votes, but a decisive one in terms of forming a government.
Precisely. The end of that first transformative labor era.
What an incredible period.
Yeah.
Establishing the welfare state, attempting that planned economy, navigating a world utterly changed by war.
Truly monumental. So the thought to leave you with is this. Considering the huge lasting impact, especially something like the NHS, how much do you think we still live in the shadow of the decisions made by the Attlee governments, both the triumphs and the challenges they grappled with?
And perhaps what lessons can we draw today about a nation's ability or maybe inability to enact fundamental change, especially in times of crisis?